Hi guys, Chillfreak here. Welcome to this video. Today I'm going to talk about the build that I just published on my channel, which is perhaps strangely called the stun that no one asked for. Well, even if no one asked for it, I still felt like it received quite a positive reception from you guys so far, so I'm making this behind the scenes video to talk a little bit about the things I didn't cover in the quick guide. Things that are good for you to know if you really want to try out this build. So let me start by talking about the pros and cons of this build. I think that's a good place to start. So I think the biggest con with this build is the mana problem, because as you see right now I have my Hatred and my Herald of Ash activated, and I have a small reserve of mana left. And since we're using Leap Slam as a movement skill, if you take a map like Channel, for example, where there's a lot of backtracking involved if you want to fully clear the map, you will eventually run out of mana. And of course that can be a problem. But I think that's a pretty small con. So I think the message here is that this is a really good build. The best things about this build is that it's such a smooth build to play with, from beginning to end. When you start to level with this build, since it's a Sunder build, you have smooth clearing till endgame. And while you do have to be prepared for, when you reach the endgame, that you won't be able to permastun everything, because that will require some investing in endgame gear and such, and that requires currency that you don't have at that stage. So I think another con with this build is that it's so much relying on the stuns. So in the early endgame, when you don't have the gear you need, you will have very dangerous boss fights. But maybe that's not a con for everyone. I'm saying it as a con because it was very frustrating for me. But perhaps for you, you'll just think of it as a challenge, and then it's not a con, then it's just something good. Now I want to talk about gear, because there are some things that are straightforward, like the uniques and some rares. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about the things that I didn't talk about in the quick guide. So I'm going to look at the amulet here, because it has some very important mods, as you see when I remove it. It has 30 to all attributes plus 22 to intelligence. So in total it gives me 52 intelligence and 30 dexterity. But the reason I want this is because if you take a look at the claw here, for example, that I'm using, which you will use as well, it has 80 intelligence requirement. And if you take a look at Hatred, it has 68 intelligence requirement. So you need to make sure that you have at least 80 intelligence, and if you want to run Curse on Hit in your gloves, you need even more. As you can see, 96 intelligence. That is the thing that requires the most intelligence from me. And then we have dexterity as well. If we take a look at my boots, you can see I have 44 dexterity on them. And if I remove it, my helmet goes off. That's because I want Blood Rage, max level. And you need 155 dexterity for that. And if you take a look at the passive tree, you will see that there's no dexterity or strength nodes, basically. Maybe 4 dexterity nodes, I think maybe 1 intelligence somewhere here. So yeah, that's a problem, and you need to make sure that you get the dexterity you need and intelligence you need on your gear. And you don't have to get it on the amulet or helmet, or boots. You can get it anywhere that it fits. You have to just keep it in mind when you're buying your gear, because otherwise you're gonna end up with problems, and you're gonna have to get one of these, 30 dexterity nodes or something, which is not something you want in the end game. Another thing I want to talk about is the mana leech. I mentioned it in the quick guide. The important thing about this mod is that it's a prefix mod, and it's rolled from Haku. You only need him in level 5, so it's very easy to get. You don't have to worry about getting a low roll, as you can see, because I have very low roll, but it's enough. And more importantly, it's the only source of mana leech you have. So if you don't get this, and you want to get life instead, which I don't recommend, you need to find some other means of mana leech. So just keep that in mind. This mod is important. So I think that's all the things I have to say about the gear. Now I want to move on to the gem setups, because I just showed you the gem setups, but I didn't talk anything about them in the quick guide, so I want to do that now. So in the helmet, you see I have all my auras here. My Blood Rage, coupled with increased duration. Now, I just showed you this. You can take out increased duration and put something else there if you want. It's not really a must. It's there because of the Blood Rage. Because when I go into long boss fights, like the Guardian fights, for example, I have to constantly reactivate my Blood Rage because I don't kill any mobs, unless maybe I'm facing the Chimera. But usually then I still have to keep the thought process of always reactivating it. So increased duration is there just to make it easier for me. It's a quality of life thing, so it's not really a must. And then we have the Sunder setup, which is in my Sunder Claw. So you can see I have the melee physical damage and multi-strike inside the item. And then of course we have a damage on full life and faster attacks to go with it. If you can get higher rolls on this claw, that's great. But I think the thing you should look for is actually attack speed. Because you want the claw because it has a faster attack speed. Because you're not going to use the claw when you do Sunder. You can't do Sunder with claws, but the attack speed from the claw is still going to make the Sunder waves faster. The heavy strike setup is pretty straightforward. I don't think I need to talk so much about that. I can talk about this gem though, Bloodlust, because some of you might wonder why that is there. And the reason is because of the Ancestral Warchief setup I have here, which I always use on boss fights, because my Ancestral Warchief doesn't really do a lot of damage. I think we can take a look at that. It says 25, well, it does damage, sure, but it's there for one reason, and that's because it has a high chance to bleed. The enemies will bleed, so the Bloodlust gem will activate, or will synergize with this. So we get 60% more melee physical damage. And as you know, if you played Path of Exile for a long time, more is really good. It's better than increased. More is just juicy. And then we have the glove setup. That might have caused some of you to wonder, so I want to cover that briefly. So the gloves have faster attacks inside them. You can choose to skip this, but the reason I did it is because I have a Leap Slam coupled with Curse on Hit and Vulnerability. So I think this is most helpful on bosses, because Curse on Hit will only apply on a few mobs in the pack, so it won't really make a difference when I'm clearing maps. But when I'm facing boss, it could make a huge difference. It's a really good curse. I would recommend using it, but it's not a must. Definitely not if you have trouble getting this, mod on your gloves, and you just want more life instead, which you probably want in the beginning. This is just the setup I ended up going with in the end, because I wanted to max out on damage. And then we have the cast when damage taken setup with Immortal Call. Of course, since you want that both on boss fights and when you're clearing maps, you must get the same setup on both of your Kalini's Malleus. So that covers the gems. Now, I want to talk briefly about prices, because that's always a topic on everyone's mind, and this time is no different. So I think most of you realize what's most expensive in this build. That's this here, 6-linked belly. That is definitely the most expensive piece of gear that I have. And since it's a 40% increased max life roll, I think it must have cost me 9 or maybe 10 Exalted. But I was lucky last league. I found 3 Exalted, so that wasn't really a problem for me. But for you it might be. And of course, then there's always the option of getting a 6-linked rare chest, rolled with Essence of Greed instead. It's a lot cheaper, easier to get. Yeah, here we go. Here it is. So this is the chest I was using before. And if we put that on, you can see that my life drops down by, oh, you can't see because I have turned that off, right? Yeah, there we go. My life drops down by 300. Yeah. So, yeah, you can definitely go with this. But, those 300 extra life, I'm really grateful for those in the, you know, really tough fights, like the Guardian fights and the Shaper fight. Because it's that kind of margin you have to work with when you want to take on those bosses. Yeah, and I think that's the most expensive thing. Then we also have the Sin's Rebirth, and someone asked in the comments if you really need to get that. And someone is asking me things now that I don't want to deal with. Thank you. So, when it comes to Sin's Rebirth, I think I said that as a reply to that question as well. If you don't have Sin's Rebirth and you don't have the currency to buy it, or you don't want to buy it, you can go with another pair of Lion's Roar and Seer's Promise here instead. In fact, I have even gone so far as I got 2 Sin's Rebirth and gotten 2 pairs of Sin's Rebirth and Lion's Roar when I'm doing the Minotaur, for example. So I think, yeah, that's my transition. Now we're going to talk about the final thing in this video, and that's for those people who want to push that far. They want to take on the Guardians, they want to take on Shaper, and maybe even Uber Elder someday. I haven't tried that, but you can, and I will help you by explaining how I do that. So for example, this is the chest I'm using for the Minotaur battle actually, because you can see it's roll different. It doesn't have this setup. And the reason it doesn't have this setup is because I don't use Heavy Strike when I take on the Minotaur. I use Sunder. So I just place my Sunder gems in this instead, and I have a 6-linked Sunder setup with a lot more damage as well. So this is how I kill the Minotaur. Because the Minotaur is special, he cannot be stunned, so trying to face tank him is just going to kill you. Because, as I said, this build is heavily reliant on stuns if you want to survive. Otherwise you just have to kite and kill them by Sunder, because it's too dangerous. So that's what you have to do with the Minotaur. But I think the problem with the Minotaur is that you have to keep your... Not just keep your distance, keep the right distance from him. And this will take time, because if you go too far, he will just dive straight at you. And if you stay too close, he will use his sweep attack on you, and that could one-shot you. I think it's almost one-shot me a lot of times. So keep in mind, the first thing you want to do before taking on any of the Guardians is just max out your life pool and max out your damage. Max out your gear in general. You have to prepare for these fights. You can't just go into them unprepared. So, for example, these steel rings, some of you might think, well, I don't really need that extra physical damage. These are the kinds of things you have to get if you want to take on these tough bosses. Because otherwise you're not gonna be able to survive. Maybe not the Minotaur, but the Hydra and the Chimera and the other, you know, the Guardians that you can stun. And Shaper, of course. Because then the extra physical damage is gonna do so much for you. Okay, so yeah. That's the preparation in terms of gear. Now I want to talk in general. How do you do when you're in the map that you want to play and you want to take on, for example, the Hydra? So I've gotten inside the map, and the first thing you do is you switch to your Heavy Strike setup, and here I have Val Haste coupled with increased duration. You should have that here too, or somewhere else on your gear if you can find a slot for it. And then you can place out your totem, or you can use Heavy Strike. The important thing is you kill mobs until you've charged up your Val Haste, and it's fully charged. Then you switch back to your Sunder and you can clear the map, just as usual. And when you reach the boss, finally, you have to follow these steps. So the first thing you do before you enter the boss room is you make sure your R's are on, of course. You switch to your Heavy Strike setup, so that's ready. Blood Rage, you activate Blood Rage. I'm going to turn that off now, but you activate Blood Rage. Then you jump straight onto the boss and curse him with vulnerability. Place down your totem and go. Smash. You know? That's what you do. So you go in, Blood Rage, jump, vulnerability curse, totem place, and go. These are the steps you follow. And of course, as soon as you get a stun, or even before you get a stun, you can activate your flasks. All three in one go. And when they run out, just activate them again. So yeah. You have to keep track of a couple of things if you want to take on these boss fights, because you have tough margins to work with. Yes, even I do. I know it looked very easy in the montage, but trust me, it took a lot of effort to get there. So don't expect this to be easy, but it's definitely achievable. Definitely. So, I hope that covered all the things you need to know. If there's any questions that you might have, feel free to leave those in the comments. I will answer them as quickly as I can. I hope that you will enjoy playing this build. I sure enjoyed it in 3.1, and I'm probably going to enjoy it in 3.2 as well. So let me know what you think of the build, guys, and stay tuned, stay awesome, and have a good one.